your whole food thing began in the office. It was the canteen of Richard Rogers Architects. Why did you do that? Tell us how it started with Rose Gray and how did the whole thing begin?
Shortly, because it's a long story. But Richard and I were living in Paris, where he was designing a building. And we came back to London, having lived in Paris for 5 years. And it was Richard, really thought that he didn't want to move into a building in the city or a building, in an office. He wanted to create a community. And I think living in Paris made us very aware of being, outsiders and sticking together quite closely with the people we worked with our family. And so when we came back, he really looked for a place where there could be a community. And we found these warehouses on the Thames, which are quite in the western part of London, Hammersmith, and they were originally Duckham's Oil, and so that was noisy, it was dirty, it was quite industrial. And he and his partners bought the site and tore down one of the warehouses so you could see the river. They took a large part of the space, but there was somebody who framed paintings, there was graphic designers, there was another architect. The idea was how to create a community, and the most important thing for Richard, being Italian, having lived in France, loving food, mother was a great cook, was gathering together over food. How could you do that? And so there was a very small space. And we talked about it. I'd worked in publishing and I worked in the office doing books, and I was trained as a graphic designer. And so the idea was we would interview various restaurants or small cafes that would want to come into this very small space. And I can actually remember the night that we were skiing, and I turned to Richard and said, the only thing worse than not having a place to eat would be to have a mediocre one. And these are mediocre. I think I'll do it. I honestly said, I think I'll do it. And so from that idea, we went back to London, and Rose Gray, a magnificent woman who was a great friend of Zad's family as well, had come back from New York. She'd worked with Keith McNally on setting up Nell's, and she was back in London. She was cooking. And I said, let's go, can we meet for a coffee? Neither of us really knew very much about doing a restaurant.
But the reason you wanted to do it was because you wanted this to be a sort of social center of the campus.
A place where people could come and have lunch. We weren't even allowed to open. We wanted to open to the public. We wanted to be the best Italian restaurant in London. The idea that we wanted to start a canteen for the office wasn't really our idea, but we had the restriction of not being allowed to open to the public, and we could only be open for lunch.
And why Italian?
That's a good question, yeah. Richard's family were in Florence. His mother was Italian from Trieste. We spent a lot of time in Italy, and Rose had actually lived in Lucca for 2 years with her children.
I have the sense that you were also, it wasn't just Italian food, it was the idea that you were also interested in where the food came from. And you did all your trips, research trips about where the recipes came from.
Yeah. We really wanted to cook the kind of Italian food that we had eaten in Italy. And if you went to restaurants, Italian restaurants in London were mostly run and started by managers or waiters. And they brought the kind of food that they thought people would want to eat in London. Quite heavy, parmigianis, which are delicious, spaghetti with meatballs, cheap Chianti. And we wanted to bring the kind of food that we had cooked and eaten in Italy. Bread soups, pasta sauces that were simple.
That all seems fairly obvious now, but 35 years ago, that must have been
It was very challenging. We used to go to Italy and bring back Parmesan cheese. We used to go and bring back a prosciutto. I remember carrying a prosciutto. And famously, Rose once brought back a huge pumpkin, and she gave the pumpkin a seat in business class, and she sat in economy, But it changed. It did change.
And have you seen that change over these years?
Radically.
Yeah.
I think that, as I sometimes say, when cheap flights started happening, that you could fly to Florence or fly to Naples for £15, more and more people went to Italy and thought, wow, I can eat this in Italy. I'd like to eat it in England. In the beginning, we'd serve a papa pomodoro, which was made of bread and tomatoes and basil. And people would say, well, at the time, why should I pay £5 for this? people became much more involved, I think, in the kind of food you could eat.
And what other changes have you seen over this period? I mean, what else is...
Well, it's been 37 years, so there has been, I think, people, eating out more. I think that people go to restaurants do want to know about sourcing. And then I think for us, a big radical step was when we became involved with the people who produced our wine. And so, we were very Tuscan-based in the beginning, but then we went to Piemonte to meet the wine producers, or Sicily to meet the wine producers, or Puglia. It took us into the world of people who were creating something, and then also people who were then starting to really think about bringing food from Italy to England. We brought back seeds. We brought back the seeds for Cavolo Nero. I have to give Rosa credit for that, and found a farmer near Southampton who grew it for us, and so we were able to have Cavolo Nero in 1989, when nobody even could get it at all. So we could make Ribollita. You can't make Ribollita really without Cavolo Nero. And then became very involved in olive oil as well, because the people who make the wine also make the olive oil. So we bottled our own olive oil. We'd go and do that.
I used your cookbooks for, 30 years or whatever. And I think the cookbooks were also a way of explaining the idea of River Café, no? I mean, do you have that feeling that they were sort of fundamental to the idea of the River Café, not just as a place, but as another way of looking at food?
Yeah. When we were asked to write our first cookbook, the River Café cookbook, and we said, we're not cookbook writers, we're, chefs, so no. And then we started thinking, well, how can we, in a way it almost became a handbook for the people who worked. So they'd come up, a chef would be working and say, how do I make rotolo, or how do I make a tomato sauce? And we'd have to explain. And then we thought, well, if we write them down, and I think it's a long story again, so I won't, but the cookbooks, the first cookbook that we did, we wrote the recipe down, we took a photograph of the food right away, no styling, we just took, and it's like, if you follow these directions, you will be able to make something that we make. It's simple, it's easy, it's accessible. This is the way we cook in the River Café. This is the way you can cook at home. It was kind of bringing restaurant food to the domestic kitchen.